Hello to all the participants. I am Syed Raza Abbas, a PhD student affiliated with Aga Khan University Institute of Educational Development, Karachi, Pakistan. The topic of my today's presentation is Iqbal's concept of leadership and Cosmos fluid model. The objectives of my presentation are a brief introduction of Muhammad Iqbal, definition and development of Khudi as a core concept of Iqbal's leadership concept, comparison of Iqbal's and Foucault's concepts of power, proposing Cosmos fluid model of leadership by synthesizing the concepts of Iqbal and Foucault, and finally suggesting some future avenues for the study. First of all, the importance of this topic. Uh, Regarding the indigenous knowledge, UNESCO has said that it has argued that education being the fundamental right is also a way to protect and develop indigenous knowledge, skills, and cultures, and should be worked upon instead of putting it on back burners. So there is great importance attached with indigenous knowledge. And one of the other thing is that in the field of leadership literature, uh, in case of leadership, therefore, when seen as necessarily situated in relational paradigm, because in modern concept of power, we see power as in a relational paradigm, it would appear unlike that a single model be identified. Introduction of Allama Muhammad Iqbal. He was born in 1877 in subcontinent India, was a poet philosopher, a Muslim modernist, engaged in a synthesis discourse with the West. He rejected the idea of Cartesian duality of mind and body and was inspired by the unity of ideal and real paradigm. He coined the concept of Khudi, translated to be as self or individuality, and went on explaining all his ideology around this concept. The basic assumptions of Iqbal's concept of leadership. I have selected a poem of Iqbal. Some of the, some of the points here are very important. For example, Iqbal says that since the life of the universe comes from the strength of the self, so Iqbal is taking that self or Khudi as existence, says that since the life of the universe comes from the strength of the self, life is in proportion to this strength. Because the earth has a being that is firm, the captive moon goes around it perpetually. So Iqbal is taking the example from cosmos and saying that because earth is firm in its existence or in itself, and that is the reason that moon is revolving around the sun. And then he says that go on saying the being of sun is stronger than that of the earth. Therefore, is the earth bewitched by the sun's eye. And the same principle actually follows in the relationship between sun and the earth, because the sun is more firm in its existence than as compared to the earth. So the earth is actually revolving around the sun. So Iqbal is taking power as a gravity, and you can see that he's taking an example from cosmos to explain this power concept, or you may also say the leadership concept. And the basis of this leadership concept of Iqbal is the strength of the self. We can also take an example of development of star. Here you will be aware of the steps which a star takes from its birth to its end. And it actually depends upon the strength, the inner strength of that star. From nebula, it starts. And if the inner core is has more gravity, it attaches more gas with it. And then it takes the lower path. And finally, it ends up becoming a black hole. And all this procedure actually is dependent on its gravity, the inner part, how dense the inner part is, the core is, and how much the gravity that core has that can attract the things towards itself and make it denser and denser, and even dense to the limit that it becomes a black hole, having the immense gravity, even the light cannot escape it. So now the factors influence the development of Khudi or self. Iqbal says that there are five major factors. There are many factors others, but I have selected these five as the major ones. Iqbal says that the first factor affecting the development of Khudi is the purpose, and it should be emancipation, liberation from time and space, and even from the individual desires, and even the desire of the destination. And then he says that freedom is very important for the development of this self or Khudi, because the Khudi cannot be developed, or the self cannot be developed until unless it is subjected to the free environment. Then creativity and action. Obviously, creativity and action is very important for a self to develop itself. Then the desire, the propulsion, the main motivation and propulsion that makes, the self keep on developing and completing different stages. And then the perpetual endeavor, because Iqbal says that the development of self has a limitless the destination is there is no limit to the development of the self. So a self should go on for perpetual endeavor. Now, if I take these five things and try to provide an analogy of journey and the leadership, the analogy of Iqbal's concept of leadership, I think the journey will be a good analogy for that. So, first thing, Iqbal says that destination, and when we see destination, eternity as a true emancipation should be the self's destiny. And then traveler, who is traveler? Individual and community are the travelers. And mean, obviously, the fuel is your desires, the desire in the self, the immense the desires are, obviously, the faster it will be covering, the self will be covering its, journey. And then the course. Obviously, the course is perpetual endeavor, because it is a never-ending process. The development of a self in Iqbal's eye is a never-ending process. And then the outcomes. What are the outcomes? Iqbal says that the whole this journey actually sums up into some outcomes, and that outcome is the strength of the self. The same inner core of the self that becomes intense and intense, or strengthen and strengthen, dense and dense, and gives more and more power to that self. Now, it is obvious that this self actually develops under the influence of three circles: genetics and environment, and obviously the free will. Genetics and environment are not in the control of the self, and these are like fate. And obviously, the free will is in the control of an individual. And Iqbal says that an individual can go on building its free will to the extent that that this free will circle can engulf all, the other two circles as well. So now I'm entering into the comparison of Iqbal and Foucault's concept of power. This is an interesting, comparison, and I will be coming out of these comparison by synthesizing both the concepts, and how I did it. Let us see. Uh, Thus, the site of resistance and agency for Iqbal is the human body. Foucault too has reflected upon the human body to theorize power. However, he has viewed the body more as a site of domination rather than as a site of resistance and agency. As in Discipline and Punish, and in the History of Sexuality, the books which Foucault has written. So the argument is, the researcher is taking the argument that Foucault has taken the self to be more passive, not in an active, a passive sort of an entity which is subjected to the power of discipline or society or anything else. Whereas Iqbal talks of Khudi as well, but do we need to? Iqbal talks of Khudi as well. Iqbal talks of Khudi means, what I want to clarify here, that Iqbal, Foucault says that the power cannot be stored in an individual, but what Iqbal is likely to say is that the power is stored in an individual, and he's taking it as Khudi. But at the same time, he does not deny the relational nature of power to make individual an active agency of power. And how? Iqbal's concept of power is that Iqbal says that whereas in the case of Iqbal, power comes through unity. The unity, any object invading the subject and the subject invading the object. So there must be some unity. So Iqbal is not arguing power to be power as a stored entity in an individual. At the same time, he's saying that it is relational as well. And there are two things that are unifying each other, invading each other, and finally, this unity of invading object into the subject and subject into the object actually forms the concept of power. It creates common outlook among them. Thus, they are bound together firmly for the purpose of achieving common goal. And what we are deducing from these concepts is that it seems like that Iqbal is of a point that power, being relational in nature, could also be stored within an individual in the form of an energy due to the relationship or tension, may I you say, between her freedom and free will, or self-determinism, as Iqbal says. So the point is that what I have observed is that Iqbal is arguing for power being stored in an individual, which seems to be contrary to the Foucault's concept that power could not be stored. But at the same time, Iqbal is saying that power does not become the part of that individual. It is again stored in relational nature within an individual. So the relational concept of power is intact. And by keeping this relational concept of power, it can still be stored in an individual in the form of, the difference between the individual's freedom and free will. Obviously, if an individual has freedom and free will, and obviously, the bigger the difference the individual creates between its freedom and free will. Utilizing his or her freedom in a rational way, and not subjugating this freedom to his or her desires, or whatever you may say it. So I have seen that what I have seen from the literature is that the Foucault also accepts this concept of free will and freedom, but he only has discussed this concept in the scenario of society, an individual in society. I am sharing an excerpt with you. In other words, when leaders and followers are involved in power relations, followers always have choice about how their actions are affected by the actions of leaders. Foucault describes this inherent instability at the heart of power relations as the recalcitrance of will and the intransigence of freedom. So, will intruding freedom, and the freedom intruding the free will. So, you can also say it as the free will invading freedom and the freedom invading the free will. So Foucault is accepting this concept at the level of society. And what I'm arguing is that Iqbal has taken this concept to the level of an individual, because individual has a relationship with him or herself. And at that point, the relation of individual's freedom and free will is a relationship, and the power can be stored and it can exist between the freedom and free will of an individual. So again, it will be a stored power in an individual, but at the same time it will be relational. An analogy to better understand this is electric current. Electrons moving in a wire and stored in a battery is a potential difference. You can see the pictures. When we replace the battery is there. At one end of the battery, there are, the potential difference is there in the battery. The positive charge is at one end, the negative charge is at another end. The current is actually, there is no existence of current. Why we see that the current is there in the wire is when we connect both ends of the wire with the battery, the potential difference within the cell makes the electrons flow in that wire. Those free electrons are already present in the wire. But when we disconnect the wire from the battery, obviously at that time, the electrons will be static. And at that moment, we'll say that there is no electric current passing through the wire. The electrons will be there, but the current is not there because those electrons are not flowing. The same is the case with the concept of power, as Foucault argues that actually power is relational. It is only exercised and it can only be seen in its outcomes. So, at the same time, when the power is relational contingent, it can be stored within a battery in the form of potential difference between its two ends. So I am taking here the two ends as one end as freedom and the other one as free will. So the more an individual keeps on building potential difference between his or her freedom and free will, the more energy, the power, the same power in the form of energy, he or she can be able can store within itself, so that this power can actually be exercised within the society whenever it is needed. So the concept, I think I've been able to make this concept clearer. that Foucault only argues that Foucault seeks the same phenomena to be exercised within at the society level. Iqbal says that it is being exercised at the society level, but at the same time, this phenomena is also evident within an individual, and the power can be stored within an individual in the relational form. So the power being relational is always there. The power is contingent. The power is relational, but at the same moment, it can be stored within an individual in the same relational form between it, the potential difference as a potential difference between its freedom and freedom. So after discussing all these things, I'll be when we see that but the power can be exercised as well as stored within an individual. I think uh, a better description of this power can be done in cosmos fluid sort of a model. So I'm postulating or I'm suggesting a new form of model for which better I mean many which is a better manifestation of power in a society. What I assume from it. Before starting entering into this model, I would like to share a quote from Lekomsky. Lekomsky argues that leadership should be viewed more like as an emergent, self-organizing property of complex systems. So it should be an emergent and self-organizing property of the complex. So I think whatever the model we suggest to suggest a description of power dynamics or leadership dynamics within our society, our organization, family, or whatever we may call it. There should be two major characteristics in it. One is that it should be it should be more like as an emergent, and other point. The second point is it should be self-organizing. It should have a self-organizing property so that it can manifest this complex system of power within our organizations, within our society, and whatsoever. So, before postulating this model, I would like to discuss the parameters of this analogy. I suggest that Cosmos fluid model of leadership would be a better way to represent the complex, dynamic, multidimensional, and ever-changing dynamics of power, exercising itself between our relations, may it be a small group, a family, an organization, a society, or the global community. Here, the mass of the object is the stored form of energy. Obviously, the mass of the object, the celestial objects we are taking here, the mass of the object is the stored form of energy. The gravitational pull represents power. Circular motion represents power outcomes. Centrifugal force represents resistance. And obviously, the centrifugal force, which the celestial objects are exercising, they tend to go out of those circular motions. This is actually resistance. The circular motions are the power outcomes. Power is actually the gravity applying between the objects, and obviously the strength of the object, how dense it is, and how strength it has, which is resulting into directly into the amount of gravity it has, will be representing the stored form of energy. So, I think the power in our society can better be represented in this way. For example, we take Earth in the middle, and the Moon is revolving around the Earth because of the same phenomena. Because the Earth is denser than the Moon, and the Earth has actually curved the space and time around it, and for that reason, the Moon is bound to go revolve around the Earth. Similarly, if we see inner solar system, the same can be observed over here. The sun has actually the more gravity. The same poem, the same content which was shared by Iqbal in his poem, which I shared in the beginning of this presentation. The sun is in the middle, and the other objects are revolving around it because the sun is much denser in its entity, in its existence, and that's why it has curved all the space and time around it, and the objects around it has started revolving around the sun. And same, we can see the closest stars. So the same phenomena is practically implicable around all these stars, and they are floating within one medium, like our society. We all now this is the age of globalization. The globe is connected with each other. The society, the global culture, the global society is a single medium in which all the individuals, organizations are actually living. They are exercising their powers and keep on changing the dynamics of this. Global media. Now we can see a Milky Way galaxy. Obviously, the same principle is obvious over here. For example, if there is a black hole in the middle of this galaxy, that black hole is actually has actually the more power in it. uh, it is more denser, it has more gravity. So what it is doing is that it has made the time and space curved around it in a shape that everything around that particular black hole started revolving around it. And at the same time, it is made up of different solar systems. And within those solar systems, same phenomena is replicating. And even if we go on subatomic level, the same phenomena between the nucleus and electrons revolving around it is happening. As we all know that actually nucleus has the mass and electrons mass is negligible, and so that is why it keeps on revolving around the nucleus. So what I wanted to suggest here is that I think there should be a modern way of representing the power dynamics in our society, and it should be in the cosmos sort of a model, because it has the fluidity in it to adjust all the dynamics, and it can keep on changing itself as per the parameters, as per the values of different things are changing. And I think this is a better way of manifesting the power dynamics in our society, even in our organizations. So we should not go on making static or hierarchical structures to show the power dynamics in our organization. I think this is the better way. It's just an idea. Obviously, there is a lot to build further within this idea. So now you can see that obviously the whole our society looks like this. The same phenomena keeps on going within this society, and I think that this is a better way of representing the power dynamics in the leadership in our organizations as well in our society and all those things. So the future recommendations. I think that there is a possibility of resolving some of the existing debates in leadership studies, like leadership being possessional or relational, skill-based or process-based, centralized and decentralized, autocratic or democratic. I think all these debates actually need some space, some fluidity within our power structures, because they can exist together in our society. And as the parameters change, the need of that organization and the need and the structure of the power dynamics in that organization keeps on changing. So they can be adjusted within one model as per the requirement and as per the as per the power structures. Another suggestion is that we can go for mathematical modeling of cosmos fluid model. And I think it will be a very powerful idea if we go on for mathematical modeling of cosmos fluid model, because that will give us a power to quantify the power, the resistance, outcomes of the power and the points of resistance and all those things which Foucault mentioned is important in the concept of power. And like game theory, I hope that this model can give us capability to go on calculating the power dynamics of our society for future predictions, to evaluate current models, or to go on analyzing the past models as well. So the third recommendation which I have is that an altogether new way of educational assessment, because because the individual stores this power within itself in the form of the difference between its freedom and free will. And if we take this as an example, obviously the resistance will be there, because for example, if the free will is showing, the freedom is there, the power of freedom is there, there will be the resistance from the free will, because this relationship is like an opposing forces sort of a relationship which has to be taken into unity. So the thing is that human beings exercise all these powers and resistance within three domains. If we talk regarding the development of the self, three domains: the knowledge domain, the skills domain, and the knowledge skill attitude domain. So the cognitive domain, the psychomotor domain, and the affective domain. So human beings actually exercise these powers and resistance on the individual level within three domains, which are actually education. As you know, the education is actually these three domains. So this model can go on giving us the possibility of altogether developing a new paradigm for educational assessment. And then we can go for AI-based modeling of the Cosmos model, and that will help us in these, calculations. Thank you very much for for your patience and for your time. This was all from my side. If you have any questions, I'll be sharing my email address on the screen, and you can go on asking the questions on my email. Thank you very much.